You know, I just have to make a little comment from the last 30 seconds. Something that I learned somewhere along the line of trying to become more interculturally competent is the difference in that pause between the end of what I say and when the next person is expected to start speaking, or in the example that just happened, how long we're expected to wait in the culture I was raised in before somebody would raise their hand. So how long would I wait to be sure that no one has a question to offer? And I have to be honest and say I waited longer than the culture I was raised in, because I've learned that the culture I was raised in had a very short wait time between. Not quite as bad as downtown New York, where you don't interrupt the person at the end of the sentence, they think you aren't interested. Not quite that bad, but close. So that's just a little FYI where we were. Maxine.
We have our students here, and I wanted Mary Beth to just,
Okay, yes. Would you introduce them to us?
Christy Fyander, Environmental Science Studies, Zane Ketchum, Environmental Science, Michael Buck, Environmental Science.
Thank you so much.
And is this another student?
I guess.
Oh, wonderful. Welcome. Happy to have you. So, good time to tell you a little bit about Elese, our next speaker, and bring her up to the podium, the mic, whatever she wants for speaking. Elese is just finishing her doctorate in mathematics at Oregon State University, Corvallis. She just gave me the graduation date, June 17th. Is that right? She earned her bachelor's degree at the University of Washington and her master's degree at Central, and then moved down to the next state over for her doctoral program. At Heritage, she specializes in teaching, because her degrees are in mathematics. She specializes in teaching mathematical approaches for teachers. How do teachers teach math successfully to students? So her background there is very helpful. As you might gather from the regalia that she wore today, she is an enrolled member of the Yakima Nation, and someone that I know they're all very proud of. She has had Elese has had some interesting other experiences besides purely her educational track and then teaching in college. But one of them was being a programmer at the Jet Propulsion Lab. Another one was she said her very first official paid job was being a math tutor at Yakima Valley Community College. She's also been a math teacher at Yakima Nation Tribal School here. And one of the things I think she feels most proud of, and I think she's very well placed thoughts, is she was a key person in writing the curriculum for the Native American studies from time immemorial curriculum that our state by law now requires each school district to include in the education of their students, finally. So, most recently on campus, I think Elese prepared a marvelous presentation on tribal sovereignty and what that means. That was very helpful to the understanding of faculty and staff across campus. So we're very honored that she's taken the time out from everything else she's doing to prepare a presentation for us this afternoon. So would you like to speak at
My name is Elese Washines. I'm going to go ahead and teach you guys some Yakima languages. That's always fun. So Shekh Patchwai is good afternoon. The glottal sound is not a part of the English language, so I taught some of you guys this before. Open your mouth like you're gargling water in the morning for after you brush your teeth and go. And then say shech patchway. Yeah. Now turn to your left and your right and say it with a smile. Shech patchway. So when Dr. Bassett initially invited me, I actually really like what Dr. Bassett said. He said, it isn't about our teaching, it's about our students learning today. So I like that as an overview for this talk. And the other thing that he didn't tell me about before I agreed to do this was that I'd be following a professional stand-up comedian. I am not intentionally funny. Everybody that knows me can attest to that. It's so fun one.
I'm not intentionally funny either.
Mary Beth talked about, I like to say Dr. Gaspin, but she prefers to be called Mary Beth. She talked about two things that I would like to explicate on today. One is that successful institutions have faculty members that allow students to bring their full identity to class and capitalize on all aspects of students' identity and learning in the learning process. That's one of the things I'd like to explicate on in terms of local funds of knowledge. And then another point was successful institutions encourage students to live for something larger than themselves. And she had a tagline for that, we over me. I like that, it was nice. So I was like, I'm a professional storyteller, that's what I do. So I always create narratives in my mind. And so, and then also think about narratives. And one of those first stories that I had was when I was younger, I was at the Shaker Church in Sadis, and I saw my Ella, who's my dad's mom. And she's a tiny little woman. She was maybe like 5 foot on a good day. And she had a huge truck. It was one of those big ones that you like to take into the mountains. And she was going into her huge truck, and I could see her like she had pulled out, she was struggling to like lift herself up and elevate herself up into her truck. And so I walked over to her and I was like, Ella, do you want some help? And she looked at me. She stopped the whole process of trying to maneuver herself into the truck. She looked at me. Just disgusted. I could see that. She didn't speak as much English, but she spoke Yakima language, but I could tell the look of disgust was in her eyes. And then she got back down and she pulled a rope out of the bed of her truck and put a stool down on the ground, climbed into the truck using that stool, then pulled that stool back into her truck using that rope. And she got in, she didn't say anything to me this whole time, and then she drove off. And I was thinking about that, and I went inside the church, and I was where everybody was washing tables after the meal. They were just using all the rags to wash the tables and clean up the dishes and stuff. And I found my dad, and I told him what happened. And my dad had that same look of disappointment and disgust in his face. And I was really young. I was maybe 7 at the time. I didn't know how I was going to help her into the truck either, but I was going to try. And then he told me, my dad has this way of talking to me that really helps me understand our different teachings in the Yakima culture. And one of those teachings, those first teachings that all young people are given, Yakima students are given, is that you don't wait to be told to do something. Don't wait to be asked. You just get in there and help without being told. So when I had I went up to my grandmother and I said, hey, do you want some help? I had offended her. Unintentionally, I had offended her because I had wanted her to ask me for help, to acknowledge my contribution to her betterment. And that was not the right way to do it. Now, if you see like an elder walking across campus, in Western society, you might go up to the elder and say, oh, would you like some help with your bags? But Yakimas, if we embrace this teaching, we don't go over there and ask them, oh, would you like some help with your bags? We go over there and we start picking up their bags for them. And we just start walking with them. Because in our culture, you're not supposed to want to be asked for help. You're supposed to just see the need and go in there and start doing it. Now, this teaching is actually very core and central to Yakima student success in higher education. And I just want to give you some examples and see if you understand, because I do come from that teaching background, so I always think we need to have some interaction here. So if my mom is making dinner, and it's going to be meatloaf and mashed potatoes, which is what she made the other day. She's making dinner, she's making meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and I walk in on the process of her making dinner. She's got the meatloaf, she's got her hands right into the meatloaf making it, and there's a bag of potatoes in there. What am I supposed to do? Right. I don't go down and sit at the table and wait for her to finish the meal. I go and get the bag of potatoes, and I get them and I start peeling them. If I don't do that, then I'm going to have a talking to, even as older as I am. So that's good. I think you have that. One of those things that that I want to capitalize back on, going back to what Mary Beth, I have to stop saying that, Dr. Gaspin. It's really hard.
If it makes you feel better, you can do it, okay?
Okay. Is that it's looking at three things. So when we conceptualize learning from the Yakima point of view, we look at recognizing a higher goal. So even if it's just a meal, or if it's climbing into a truck, an elder climbing into the truck, or getting across campus with a bunch of bags, you recognize that higher goal. And then you try to bring your strengths to that goal, like, oh, I can peel some potatoes. Yeah, I can do that. I can contribute to this meal by peeling some potatoes, and you figure out how to contribute to that higher goal. So it's kind of like a three-step process when you're looking at learning. And when I'm looking at, I wanted to start bringing this more into the education side of things. So when I'm thinking about how do Yakima students navigate between Yakima, Western communities of learning, Yakima and Western communities of learning. So I think about this time when I get to go into the schools, and I saw a first grade student. I've told somebody this story, but I saw a first grade student, a 6-year-old boy, and boy, they were just having a hard time. It was a Monday, and there were 3 adult teachers in that room, and there was me, I was the 4th adult in that room, and they were having a hard time getting this kid to go to carpet time. Now, if you're in first grade, you know that carpet time is when you go and you sit crisscross applesauce on the carpet. That's what you do in first grade when you're 6 years old. It's carpet time, and everybody knows that that's a call to action. They're supposed to go to the carpet, sit crisscross applesauce in their space, looking directly at the teacher and all that. That's what you're supposed to do. This 6-year-old boy, who was a Yakima student, he didn't go to that carpet. He went to the other carpet, looked through his backpack, and started doling out pencils and looking at his different pencils. And all the other adults, they all came over to him. And one by one, I was observing in this class, and each adult came over, and they're like, "Don't you want to go to carpet?" And that was a fail. The next adult comes over and says, "What are we supposed to be doing right now? Who are we supposed to be?" That was a fail. We went back. The third one comes over and they say, "I think you need to go to carpet time now. We're all supposed to be at carpet time." When I think about that, I was like, well, what is this student really doing? Like, is it, when the adults are talking to them, they're like, oh, we just always have a problem with this kid. Such a major classroom management issue with this kid. He's always giving us a hard time. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about Sunday, the previous Sunday before, like the day before, I was at the Longhouse with this same 6-year-old kid. And this same 6-year-old kid was doing everything that a young student should be doing, or a young Yakima boy should be doing in the Longhouse. So much so that 2 elders actually got up and spoke about how he was such a good medicine for their soul, to see him engaging in all the Longhouse activities at such a small, young age. So he walked in and he was going around the wash, our ceremonial grounds. He knew how to do the dances. He knew the protocol to get on the floor and to get off the floor, when it was appropriate to get on the floor, when it was inappropriate to get on the floor. He also knew how to pour water. And if you ever poured water for the Longhouse, it's on the ground. We eat on the ground, and so you have to bend over and pour water into a cup. You have to do a certain amount for every cup. It's pretty involved. I get intimidated. I'm glad I'm not a boy because I don't have to do that. But here it was, I was thinking about this. I was like, so there's 2 different things. Like in one community, in the Longhouse community, this little boy was acknowledged as being an expert for where he was, like such an amazing young individual. And then in another community, this little boy was not being acknowledged for who he was and what he was bringing into the community as a learner. And I was thinking about how does this draw upon the Yakima conception of teaching and learning? And I think the one thing that was missing, if you go back to that roundabout to that back point, is that this little boy couldn't recognize the higher goal. He's like, we're going to carpet for what? Why are we going to go to carpet? I mean, if I was bringing a voice to what might be going on in his mind, he saw it as a direction. We're just supposed to go to carpet and then do something. Why am I going to go to carpet? What is going to happen once I go to the carpet? I don't know. In Longhouse, though, you start off, the very word of going to Longhouse for that day was feast. He knew that there was a big celebration of food that was going to happen, and everything that he did was contributing to that overall higher goal of feast time for our people. So he knew there was a higher goal. When I'm thinking about that, it actually started me doing a Longhouse study, which I'm only allowed to speak about and not write about among our people. But it was by our different elders in our Longhouses. I was able to go in and observe young people as they participated in feasts for the very first time. So in this particular study, I was looking at the demonstration of learning. So that third point, once you recognize the higher goal and you bring your strengths to that higher goal, how do you demonstrate your learning towards that higher goal? So the third one is, how do you demonstrate your strengths to that higher goal? And in this one, I was watching young girls as they participated in serving food for feast for the first time. So in our feast ways, we have a certain way that we put down the food on the different tables, and it's very involved. But the thing about it is that when you're serving food for the first time for a feast, you are never given directions, right? Kind of goes back to my Ella and how she didn't tell me that she needed help. You don't sit down with a little girl who's doing this for the first time and say, well, first you're gonna put this root down, then you're gonna put this berry down, and then you're gonna put this berry down. And you're supposed to put it this place or that place. So you just line up everybody. And you think about this young, I saw girls 6, 7, and 8 participating in feasts for the first time, and they all had the same kind of learning structure. So they were the very last in the line. And everybody ahead of them, all 6 ladies in front of them, they all had 2 bowls of the food, the feast foods. And every single time, that little girl who was learning for the first time, she was the very last in the line. And as they walked around the Longhouse, the full stretch of all the tables and tule mats in the Longhouse, that little girl was watching as every one of the other women in front of her was putting down the food, observing where the food was placed, how it was placed, what that woman did when she put the food down. And by the time she got to the very last bowl of food that was to be put down, she knew exactly how to put that food down, exactly where to put it down, and what to do after she put it down. And that is learning in the Yakima way of thinking and believing. It's not a directive. We don't say, oh, go to carpet time, then do this, then do this. You would say, this is what you're supposed to do, this is how to contribute. Now that you're ready to participate, show that you're ready to participate and demonstrate your learning by being involved in this higher goal of serving food in this case. Now I think about in my own path how the bigger question is, how do you take a young Yakima woman or a young Yakima girl who grew up in the Longhouse and grew up with all these different teachings and make her into a math teacher? Right? I think that's something that we can go around about. It's like, how do we have more math teachers? You know there's a teacher shortage going on in the country, especially for math teachers, right? Effective math teachers. So how do you take a young Yakima girl and make her into a math teacher? And I was going to give you kind of a story there that also demonstrates this kind of learning that goes on in the Yakima focus. So first, you have a student teacher, probably from Heritage University, work with that little girl as a second grader to provide resources for success. So I remember that when I was in second grade, there was a teacher. There was low expectations by my own teacher, but the student teacher's aide, who was probably a Heritage graduate, I'm assuming, I'm just going to make that up because it seemed appropriate. I was 7. She was the one that saw something else beyond I wasn't able to communicate effectively in English. but she said that I could do mathematics. She's like, here you go. Why don't you just try everything possible? Here's all the work that you could possibly do. Take it home and do it. And I was like, all right, let's do it. So she saw that in me, and I really liked that. And then in middle school, you create a safe place to learn. Now, we always talk about creating a safe place. And why is creating a safe learning environment important for students? It's important because you need to make it a safe place for that student to be challenged. Now, if you don't have a safe place and you ask a really difficult question, nobody's going to respond. Nobody's going to take that risk. But if you create that safe place for students to learn, then you create a safe place for students to be challenged, where they start thinking, okay, well, I'm going to try, I'm going to throw this out there, let's see how it goes. So in middle school, I had a teacher, Regan, who actually was a professor here at one point, and he allowed me to come in an hour early before school at 7:30. He allowed me to come in and we would talk about mathematics. And he was the first to introduce me to like things like pi and all kinds of stuff like that. Took me to state in math, right? The next thing is you press on their strength to make sense of learning from both communities. So I knew that I was a Yakima student, and I knew that I was going into mathematics. I was going to study mathematics, and I knew that from the time I was 12 years old. And the thing about that was, in every math class that I've taken about 32 math classes at this point in my life. College math classes. I don't know about the other ones, I have to count those too. But in every single college math class, I find a way to integrate who I am as a Yakima student into that class. I just found some way to do that. And the first person who taught me to do that was Dr. Wally Strong from YVC, Yakima Valley Community College. And he said, well, yeah, if you know Dr. Strong, he's really serious toned, so I can't do him justice, but I'm gonna try. Well, yeah, you know math, and you also know you're Yakima. So how are you going to bring Yakima to being a math teacher? That's what he said pretty much. And so I worked with him and Miss Persky to design a lesson on slope for ninth grade algebra students at Toppenish High School. But it was based on our traditional hunting practices that my dad had told me about, using a crossbow or an arrow. Bow and arrow method, like how we used to hunt from the side of a mountain so that the deer couldn't smell us. It's interesting stuff. So in every single math class, I found a way to integrate my identity into that math class. Some way, somehow, and it really perplexed some of my math professors through UW and Central. And then finally, I think that Dr. Gassman had talked about being a mentor and the importance of peer mentoring. And when I was 16, I said, okay, well, I'm gonna stop working under the table and I'm gonna work over the table, get a real job here. And so I started becoming a mentor for YVC, for mathematics. And that brought around this vision of what I could do as somebody who was good at mathematics. It wasn't just about me. It started to become a whole lot more about other people, and not just how I saw mathematics, but the psychology of being able to understand mathematics from another person's point of view, especially somebody who's struggling in mathematics. Mathematics itself is intensely interesting, but understanding mathematics from a person who's struggling to understand it is super interesting. It's the best thing. That's the thing I fell in love with. I just found out that one of my mentees, when I was at YVC, when I was 16, is now a math instructor there. And she had talked about having a 16-year-old mentor a tutor when she was going to school at YVC. So that's cool. So the third point that we talked about in the Yakima concept of teaching and learning was demonstrating learning in a valued way. And so I wanted to talk about how some of our student examples here at Heritage University. Now, Caden, there's two professors in Alaska that were looking at the changing assessment practices of teachers from a rural and urban perspective, and Alaska is one of the perfect places to do that. If you know anything about Alaska, you know there's some places that you can only fly into, and so they're super rural. And so they have teacher candidates that are placed out in these very rural villages in Alaska, And so these two professors, they went out and they studied, well, how do teachers develop in their assessment practices in urban contexts and in rural contexts? And in their study, they found out that teachers in a rural context start to develop assessment practices that are more place-based. So place-based assessment practices become key. So when they first go in there, they're like, oh, I'm gonna make a test, it's gonna be multiple choice, I'm gonna have some open essay questions, all that stuff. By the end of their program, by the end of their teaching program, when they're in this rural place, they start to develop things that are more based on those students' lives. They say, this is the only way that I can make a valued assessment for these students, is by integrating their identity directly into the assessment. I think that we at Heritage University, we do definitely capitalize on students' identities when we think about assessment practices here. And that's something that I think the rest of the country could learn from. So when we think about students first, that was our tagline for a while. How do we create, support, and empower students to participate in learning experiences valued by the community? We have two or three environmental studies Yakima students here. And when I'm thinking about them, one of those things that I think about, go ahead and stand up real quick, just so they remember who you are. They're super busy college students. But I remember anytime I sit on campus and they go around together, like almost like a cohort of people, and I always find them doing fascinating things on campus. Like the other, 3 weeks ago, I found them making a bunch of sandwiches. I was like, what are you guys doing? They just had a bunch of bologna and bread and stuff. I was like, why are they making all these sandwiches? And they're like, oh, we gotta make the sandwiches before we go to White Swan. And I was like, what are you guys doing in White Swan? Oh, we have environmenters out there. I was like, what's environmenters? And they said, oh, we're mentoring some White Swan High School students. So we go out there, and we do other schools as well. And I was like, oh, that's cool. That's really cool. So they take time out of their studies, and they have professors that are in the know about them being a part of this program, and they value that kind of mentorship in the community. Other things that are going on at our university capitalizes on Enactus and American Indian Business Leaders. What I was invited to do this summer, they said, hey, Elise, do you know stats? And I said, do I? Yeah, I do. Of course I know stats. What about Excel? Can you teach Excel? I was like, yeah. And then I start to wonder what they're asking me about when they start asking me about stats and Excel. And so then these business students, they said, well, one of our professors can't do a presentation for us, so we need you to come in and do a presentation for our small business workshops. And I said, oh, what's this? What is this all about? They said, oh, well, we invite community members to come to campus and we start educating them about creating a small business in the community. And these are business students at Heritage University that do that. And if you think about that, you could have written a paper on that kind of thing. Like, how do you create a small business? Write a paper. Or you can say, how do you create a small business? Why don't you lead a series of workshops for the community members for them to invite and come to the campus? And do it in 2 languages, do it in both English and Spanish. And have 2 separate tracks. So have one track that's specifically for Yakima businesses because there's certain Yakima tribal entities that can help out and support small business. Like that kind of valued assessment is important. Valued place-based assessment is important. Other things that are going on is with our high school students as well. So we're becoming a leader for our high school students in this community. And some of those things that are happening are being recognized not just at Heritage University, but in the high schools and in the community in general. And I think about the home that I live in right now has a solar-powered roof, solar-powered water heater. And it was installed by the pre-engineering department at Heritage University and high school students at Yakima Nation Tribal School. Yeah. And from that, I actually met up with Arquette, who was one of the lead students from tribal school, and he got a contract to work with the company to install solar-powered water heaters in several different HUD homes in this community. So I think that is something that is valued. that's a valued assessment. And it's not just coming from Heritage University, it's trickling into our different community schools. And then finally, like a wraparound, because I was talking about, I always have to end with education, I think too, was that I was calculating some of the hours, and I always think about our student teachers that are in the schools and how much of an impact it has to have student teachers who have the mentorship of faculty to go in and observe them. And from our 3 different tracks in our teacher preparation program, our master's teachers candidates have 1,080 hours of contact time with students in the community per each adult. And I think that's amazing. You know, that's them. When you ask the question, how do you create a math teacher from a Yakima student? I think that's kind of one of those ways that you answer that question. You put more heritage students in front of them, and you create that valued assessment practice. So in talking today, I'm about 3 minutes over time. I had wanted to bring about the Yakima concept of learning in terms of identifying that higher goal, recognizing strength, and contributing your strength to that higher goal. And I think that it always goes back to that one foundational teaching that you don't wait to be told to do something. You just go in there and you start doing it. If you see that need, then you go in and start doing it. I think that's exactly what success is for higher education for our Yakima students. That every single one of those environmental students over there, they said, you know what, in our community, we have a need for environmental studies. We have a need to speak for the resources that can't speak for themselves. So I'm going to go and study this, and I'm going to contribute my strength to this study. So thank you for listening today.
So we'll take a few minutes if you have questions for Elise, and I'll get her back at the mic here. Anybody have a question for her? Lori?
So Elise, as I listened to the first story about you and your father's mother, I'm trying to process what that means for us on campus in terms of providing academic or other sorts of support services for Yakima students. Is the implication that we should not say, what help do you need, but to infer?
Don't speak to the individual, speak to the higher goal. So where do you see yourself in 4 years versus what can I do to help you? Because Yakima students who are successful, who have made it to this point in higher education, they're not thinking about themselves, they're thinking about the higher goal.
Thank you.
Another question for Elise? Yeah, Mary Beth.
Thank you, Elise, that was really wonderful. I love the way you tell stories too, it's really lovely. I guess the question I wanted to ask is, given all that you know about math, and given how so many young people are afraid of math, and I'm not sure how that plays out in the Yakima community, but what would you do if you could just completely have your way about changing the way that we teach math just in general? What would you do given all that you know, and you're bringing math together with your Yakima traditions and cultures?
Yeah. Well, if I could do anything, right?
Anything.
I would get rid of age-based classrooms.
You get rid of.
I would get rid of age-based classrooms.
Do you think you could do that?
I think so. Well, when I was doing my Longhouse study, I looked at how young boys learn to dance on the wash as well. And it wasn't that they're not told directions by adults about how to jump or how to dance to a certain song. What they do is they look to the older men or the older boys in the line, and they learn from them by observation. And I think that's really what we need to go in terms of mathematics, is that we need to start looking at how observation and how looking at models from your peers influences your own mathematical thinking.
Thank you.
So what's the classroom scenario like for elementary school if there's no age-based classroom? How is that organized?
Yeah, I think think, well, that's an involved question. But, you know, it goes kind of go back to our original point that Heritage University could be a model for what's going on in other communities. We don't have age-based math classrooms here at Heritage. So what could it look like? It would look like a bunch of little Heritage University math classrooms all over the community.
But I think to your question, as you take a look at what I think is the most significant movement in education, K-12 education in our nation, is the whole competency-based education movement that are not chronologically grouped. And there's some great work happening on the East Coast, and our speaker on the 20th, Paul Revelle, will share some of that great work. But that whole competency-based, performance-based model. And then the other theme in College of Education that we're talking a lot about is the need for us to be aware of and model these practices. And once again, I think Elese brings up a great demonstration that the more we are aware, in this case of the Yakima culture, we realize that these traditions are great traditions that we need to incorporate for all students that are in line with the best thinking that we're seeing now. But that whole competency-based model, I think, is the answer to your question and what Elese is talking about.
And there's a big movement in higher education toward competency-based, largely being modeled by Western Governors University, which is entirely based on competency-based. And actually, they have trainings available, and I serve on an advisory committee for them, where you can invite in people that know how to do this competency-based approach at the college level and have them work with your faculty. So that's something that we really could work. Actually, I even asked, I think I told you that earlier, Lori, we talked about, you know, could we do a little bit more of that? Because that may tie in with what Dr. Bassett said at the beginning today about certificates and other kinds of recognitions besides the traditional baccalaureate degree connected with this competency-based. It's something that we all need to learn how to teach within. And there's a lot of modeling from the way the Yakima culture organizes learning because you have kids that are asked to do things or are allowed to do things that are younger than other kids that aren't quite ready to do it because of their competency level rather than their age or their height or whatever. Anybody have another question? Yes.
We can't call you Dr. Washines yet for another.
Oh, I'll give you permission. It's only 2 months early.
So if you follow your example, doesn't that suggest that elementary, even preschools, elementaries, high schools, universities ought to be built together so that you could tell, you know, on a campus, why would we not have preschool, elementary schools, and kids all running around together? Does that make, and not just for math?
Yeah.
What's your thought about it?
I think that we do. So Yakima Nation Travel School is both a middle school and a high school. And so the students do interact. And then Yakima Nation Travel School, I think that's where you have middle school, high school, and Heritage University students combined into one. So we have Heritage University students that are at Yakima Nation Travel School, and they come to campus here. Heritage also has the Early Learning Center, and I think that we learn as much from our young students at the Early Learning Center as they learn from us.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you for today. Secondly, I work at WSU and I do a lot of work in our reinstatement program, which is our academic probation program. And I do not believe in the word failure, but I can tell you that students do, and students are very afraid of failure. How is failure, failing in class, not passing in class, conceptualized in the Yakima culture, and what can we do to abate the fear of failure and keep our students engaged and wanting the degree for the higher goal, right? Keeping them attuned to that instead of what I see as students getting upset and exiting the university.
I think that success, and that same token, success and failure are envisioned kind of in the same way. You see a departure from seeing learning in terms of what you're bringing to a community to more academic achievement in terms of yourself. And so I think that when you're talking with any Native student, Yakima student, or even other students, rural students especially, because I see the same things happening in rural studies, is that you have to talk about keeping them focused on what they're doing in terms of bringing their strengths back to the community and seeing failure not as, seeing failure and success kind of not as individualized, but something that they're bringing back to their community one way or the other. There's something to learn from failure. There's something to learn from success, but it's definitely not an individual thing. There's something along the way, all along the way, that contributes to that. So you start to bring them to recognizing factors that contribute to both failure and success. And that's what they're accustomed to doing, I think.
Well, thank you so much, Elise, not only for your wonderful presentation, but for your very thoughtful and competent answers. We really, really appreciate that.